Anytime we're ready? All right, let's start. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this Smarter Health Seminar. I am Shirley Fenton, Managing Director of the Waterloo Institute for Health Informatics Research. Thank you for joining us today. I'd like to give a special welcome to our web viewers and the Ontario Telehealth Network sites, as well as Sherbrooke University. This seminar is being recorded and is being broadcast over the web. We ask that you hold your questions to after the seminar presentation so that we can get a microphone to you. For our virtual viewers, please send in your questions and we will ask them for you. These seminars are hosted by the Waterloo Institute for Health Informatics Research, the Lawson Health Research Institute, and the National Institutes for Health Informatics. We are very grateful to our seminar sponsors, McKesson Canada, Healthcare Information Management and Communications Canada, and ITAC-Health. We could not host these seminars without their support. Just to note, this is the last seminar for 2009. I can't believe we've gone through a whole year already. Our next Smarter Health Seminar will be on Tuesday, January 24th, 2010. And a very important note, the National Institutes of Health Informatics, along with the co-hosts of this institute and the School of Pharmacy at the University of Waterloo, will be holding the first Advances of Health Informatics Conference on April 28th to the 30th at the UW's Health Science Campus in Kitchener. The call for papers has been announced, and we encourage you to submit your papers for consideration and also to attend. The deadline for submission is December 20th. Today we have a very special announcement. It is my pleasure to announce the recipient of the first Medal of Excellence in Health Informatics from the National Institutes of Health Informatics. This award is intended to recognize major contributions by Canadians to the foundations or applications of health informatics. These contributions can include new theory or frameworks, new methodologies, innovative systems or applications, widely adopted standards, the production of cogent evidence in the value of health informatics-related interventions, or other contributions that have significant impact both within and beyond Canada. The following criteria must be satisfied by all candidates for the medal. Candidates must currently be Canadian citizens or landed immigrants in Canada. The contributions by the candidate must be original and must have been published in a recognized peer-reviewed journal, preferably a health informatics journal, or otherwise made accessible to open peer review and critique. The contributions by the candidate must be judged to be significant. The contributions by the candidate must be used and or have been recognized with impact both widely in Canada and preferably globally, and once a person and only one person can receive this award in a calendar year. I am so pleased to announce that the first recipient of this medal is Dr. Roger Cote, who exemplifies all of this with his seminal work on SNOMED. For those of you who are not familiar with Dr. Cote's work, there is a very nicely publicized book on his work called The Evolution of SNOP to SNOMED International, a 30-year history. And indeed, this medal has been named after Dr. Cote and will be known as the Cote Medal of Excellence in Health Informatics. I will now ask Professor Dominic Covey, the founding director of the Waterloo Institute for Health Informatics Research at the University of Waterloo and the director of the National Institutes of Health Informatics, to speak about Dr. Cote and his contributions. Dominic is not available to be with us in person and will speak to us via a Skype connection. So Dominic, please make your comments.
Well, hopefully all the technology will work, Shirley, and we have selected Dr. Cote for his contributions to the conceptualization, design, development, and promotion of the SNOMED standard, which is now Canada's standard vocabulary and being adopted across the globe. Dr. Cote's work should be a matter of pride for all Canadians, and for us at NIHI, it represents the nature of the contribution of the highest value to the Canadian health system, to e-health, and to each of us. Just a few words about Dr. Cote's background. He obtained his doctorate in medicine from the University of Montreal and a Master of Science in Experimental Pathology from Marquette University in 1964. He began his academic career at Marquette University and continued at Tufts and Harvard University. In 1969, he joined the University of Sherbrooke as a professor of pathology and department head. From 1983 to 88, he was secretary of the Faculty of Medicine at the University of Sherbrooke. In 1973, he was named chairman of the Committee on the Nomenclature and Classification of Disease of the College of American Pathologists and developed the systematized nomenclature of medicine from 1973 to 1993, so 20 years of work. In recent years, he's worked on the French translation. He was awarded the Outstanding Meritorious Service Award by the College of American Pathologists in 1979, and in 1992 awarded an honorary Doctor of Science degree for his work by the University of Victoria in 1997. He received the Pathologist of the Year award. So Roger has gotten many awards in the process here. In naming, though, this medal for you, Roger, and in awarding it to you, we hope we have recognized and helped others to recognize what represents a significant contribution to health informatics. Our deepest thanks for what you have done through this amazing effort, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Dominic. I will now ask Dr. Andrew Grant to present the medal to Dr. Cote, who are both at Sherbrooke University. We will be able to see this presentation through a video broadcast link made possible by the Ontario Telemedicine Network and TELUS. So, Dr. Grant, would you please present the medal to Dr. Cote?
Are we in connection?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks very much indeed, and thanks for in fact doing this honor. It's a privilege for me to be here. It's a privilege to be part of the same university. I knew Roger since 1987. We met in Finland for the first time. I joined the university in 1989, and I can tell you we've had a few sessions discussing SNOMED CT in your office, including sharing a couple of good cigars. And I'm also speaking as part of the Quebec Health Informatics Society, for which I'm the vice president, to share in this honor. I think it's fair to say that without Roger there would be no SNOMED today. His paper that he published in, I think, around 1968 on this was recognized as one of the 20 most important papers in health informatics in the annual review of health informatics in the year 2000. So Roger, for all of these things, and as part of the whole community here, it is indeed a privilege to present you this medal, justly deserved. One of my heroes.
I want to thank Dr. Grant for acting as the intermediary, since I don't travel much anymore. I used to travel when I was known as the father of SNOMED, but now, past 80, I am the grandfather, so that I don't get around too much. But coming here to this particular room in the hospital was relatively easy. And I want to thank the people of the NIHI and Shirley Fenton and Dominic for having made this possible. It really crowns my career, and I sincerely appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Grant and Dr. Cote. Roger, I must admit, we're no longer seeing Roger on the screen, but you'll have to agree with me that Roger looks fabulous for being over 80. I think he could have come here, and we would have been delighted if he could have joined us in person. But this has worked equally well, and I'm very grateful for all the technology that has made this happen, as well as our crew. Dr. Cote, we are so pleased to award this first medal to you, and we will be sending you a token check in appreciation for your important contributions to health informatics in Canada. And I have here a draft version of the medal, so you can take a look at it after the seminar is over, so you can see what Roger received. And as well, he received this plaque that will be put in plaque form as well. So we are very honored that Roger is our first recipient of the Cote Medal in Health Informatics Excellence in Canada. But we're not done with acknowledging excellence in Canada. It is now my pleasure to acknowledge the support of McKesson. Ron, the Waterloo Institute for Health Informatics Research, has been the recipient of McKesson's support for many years now, entirely through your good graces. Most recently, you extended this support to our newly inaugurated National Institutes of Health Informatics, joining the first echelon of supporters of our national activities. There are very few ways that we have of recognizing what is, to us, a crucial contribution by a leader in the industry. Besides our thanks, we'd like to give you this plaque, so perhaps you can come up here, commemorating the role McKesson has played in making what we do possible. We hope that when you look at this from time to time, it brings to mind our sincere gratitude and also brings a smile to your face when you remember our many conversations, our other interactions, and this day when you joined a distinguished lineup of health informatics experts who have presented here in our Smarter Health Seminar Series. In the name of all of our members, please accept this along with our warmest thanks.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I'm going to do that.
I know, it was a surprise. We kept it a little bit of a surprise, except to others in McKesson. As many of you know, the Smarter Health Seminars this year have focused on leaders in health informatics and the e-health industry. Today, we are pleased to have Ron Dunn, who is the Vice President of Sales at McKesson Canada, as our guest speaker. He has been in the healthcare industry, technology industry for more than 20 years, 15 of those with McKesson. Ron graduated from the economics program at the University of Western Ontario. He has ably led McKesson during those 15 years at McKesson and has also provided leadership to the health informatics industry in Canada. This leadership was acknowledged just last week, again, when McKesson received the Company of the Year Award at the Canadian Health Informatics Awards Gala. Ron is speaking on A View of the Canadian Healthcare IT Industry, a Radical Perspective. Please welcome Ron Dunn.
I guess I'm on now. Thank you very much, Shirley. That was a very nice surprise, and congratulations, Dr. Cote, if you're still out there. A well-deserved honor. So now that I have to regather myself because I had a different starting point to begin from. But again, thank you very much. Our support of this institute has been unwaning for a number of years. We've done a lot of work together, and it's reaped a number of benefits for McKesson over those years. So we appreciate the acknowledgement. I'm going to now get into discussing what I came here to talk about. And it's interesting, I've been trying to figure out how do I deal with an audience in the room and an audience over there. And I'm not quite sure how I'm going to do that, so hopefully I'll be able to have a few laughs, and we'll pretend the people out there are laughing as well. Also, I like to move around a lot, so Mr. Cameraman, I'll try to stay in one place, but if I'm moving too much, you give me a signal or two, okay? I'm going to give you a bit of an agenda to begin with. I'm just going to let you know what McKesson is. A lot of people don't know the organization that I work for and represent. So we'll talk a little bit about that, and we'll go through a little bit of the Canadian healthcare industry. I'm sure many of you are well versed in the industry, but we'll go through a few facts, lay a bit of a foundation for some of the ideas that I'd like to talk about. We'll consider some priorities, observations, and some questions. Challenging conventional thought. I'm not really a radical kind of a person, but I think there's a few ideas that I'd like to toss out to the crowd and see what you think. Get some reaction. Have a little bit of dialogue back and forth. Maybe I know we're having questions at the end, but I might ask for some feedback while I'm talking. I also want to talk about a success story. There's a lot of success stories. I've chosen one. But I think we have to acknowledge in this industry and in these times that successes are there, and we need to remember that they're there. There's failures, and there's mistakes, and there's a lot of other things that occur, but there's also successes. So I wanted to bring up one of those. And then I'm going to close by talking a little bit about just what's the general tone of the challenge in our industry, and what do we do, or what do we see as that major challenge? What do we see as the major thing that's happening across the country with respect to e-health? And I'll also mention how does McKesson address it. So that's kind of the roadmap for the next 45 minutes or so. But this is who we are. McKesson is a fairly sizable organization across North America and the world, and we bring together clinical knowledge, process expertise, technology, and the resources of our company to help our customers fundamentally change the cost and quality of healthcare. How do we do that? Well, we're a pretty large company, and so one of the reasons we are able to effect those kinds of changes is due to the size of the organization. 15 on the Fortune 500 right now, $110 billion in revenues, a fairly significant market share across North America, a large number of employees. But our IT business, which is really what we're here to talk about, is also the largest IT organization strictly dedicated to healthcare. And that's within McKesson. And that organization within McKesson is a $4 billion revenue-generating company. We provide a lot of technologies, and this just kind of goes across the various types of things we provide. The size of the company, solutions portfolio, including clinical medication management, revenue and supply chain management products, resource and supply chain rather, as well as revenue cycle, technology, consulting, outsourcing, et cetera, and a few statistics about what our customers reap from us. Now, what are we in Canada? Because as a Canadian organization, we really focus on our business in Canada, and we drive business in this country, leveraging the strengths of our business in Canada. So within that, what I just described is this organization, which is a $9 billion organization in Canada, with retail and institutional accounts across the country. We're a wholesale pharmaceutical distribution company. That's most of what McKesson is. So drugs come from the manufacturer, they come to us, and we distribute them to retail pharmacies and hospitals. In a nutshell, that's the business. It's a very complex business. There's a lot of elements and supply chain components and distribution components within, but that's effectively, at a high level, what the company does. We have 3,000 employees across the country in distribution centers all across the country in every province. And we have, in addition to being a distribution company, we're also a technology company, which I'm going to talk about in a second. But one of the components of our technology is pharmacy automation. And in pharmacy automation, we have the largest footprint in the country in hospital and in the retail environment. And this is the technology business within McKesson. So within McKesson, we have this business called Integrated Healthcare Solution. I'm the vice president of, and we focus on information solutions, supply solutions, and community health solutions. That's what we deliver to the marketplace from an IT perspective. And of course, establishing connectivity across these things within this healthcare IT environment is obviously critical to moving our business forward. This is just a little bit of what we do. So there's a whole pile of clinical solutions that we provide, and across the top are some key components of what we deliver to the marketplace. So we have portals, and we'll talk about a success story related to portals later on. We have point-of-service devices such as kiosks. People go into a hospital, they want to register themselves. We have kiosks in our hospitals, our hospital customers, where people can actually register themselves and walk in and head off to the unit where they're having whatever procedure done for them. There's some, that little tiny white device. Oh, I have a pointer here. I wanted to point this one out to you. That little device right there is a Health Buddy. It's a device that's used in the home for monitoring patient either vital signs or various conditions like diabetes. Registering information there sends it back to the hospital or to the home care provider or whoever is managing that individual's care with information and data related to their condition. We also provide automation components, and that's the pharmacy or the pharmacy automation component of our business. There's the distribution piece all across the country, and of course patient connectivity is significantly important, and we'll talk about the patient's role in this healthcare system of ours a little later on. I'm going to walk through a little bit about the healthcare system. I don't want to put you to sleep with this stuff, so I might go a little quick. If anybody has questions or comments, by all means, please throw up your hand and we'll address them. I'm sure you know we spend about 70% of our of spending on healthcare is coming out of public funds. And in our case, this year, and I'm missing my slides here, I'm going too fast. This year, or last year rather, was $171 billion, and of that, I think it was about $119 billion was focused on public spend. So that's the total spend, including the private. And if you add the public in, it's that total 171. But what I thought was interesting in relation to this particular bit of information is the IT expenditure. This is data that we've collected over the years, but about 2.3% of that total spend is going into technology in some way, shape, or form. We'll talk a little bit about how that happens. Also, we face an aging population. And this really, I just want to highlight one statistic, and that's the one right there. 34.4% by 2011 will be over the age of 65. It's an incredible amount of growth in a short period of time, which is putting an incredible amount of pressure on the system within which we operate. Same information, just depicted slightly differently, but the point is that 1 in 4 Canadians will be over the age of 65 by 2026. Another significant growth in that segment of the population. And the question is, where are we going to put all of us old people? This is where we're going to have to go. Long-term care. Long-term care is going to be a significantly growing industry in this marketplace in the next number of years. That's the current state of it right now in terms of facilities and beds. Roughly the same distribution between public and private. Suspect that distribution is going to change as that industry evolves and the pressures on that marketplace continue to increase. I think that one of the interesting factors today is the long wait times that if any of you are dealing with individuals getting into long-term care settings, the long wait times are a simple example of the pressures that are on that marketplace and the fact that we need a lot more investment in the long-term care and home care market. A lot of money is being spent now, but I suspect that we'll see a lot more going into it. So there's the private and public spend on the long-term care and home care industries. Expect to see this grow significantly and expect to see a lot of information technology players get very, very interested. A lot of them are already interested in this space. It will continue to grow dramatically. This one also deals with the fact that we've got an aging population, but they are having trouble finding doctors. So 38% of the aging population is having trouble finding a family doc, and in general across the country, we've got 16% of us that don't have a family doc. And you all know that if you do get sick, you just go to the hospital and get somebody to take care of you, which puts an incredible burden on the emergency departments all across the country. So again, the unsustainable rates of what's happening in the system, and we talked about the total. This is going up to it's $171 billion in 2008, and we'll see it increasing in the coming years. And the key point, of course, is that it's simply an unsustainable way to continue. Let's talk about something a little bit different. Let's talk about what spending is happening on the technology side. And at least we can see the governments are spending some money on capital, or they're investing capital in the technology space. We need to leverage that. We have been leveraging it, and of course we have to recognize that this is in keeping with investments that Canada Health Infoway has been putting into the system over the last number of years as well. Almost not necessarily in concert, but certainly in relation to and in equal measure in some cases and in greater measure in other cases. This is the investment that Infoway has implemented over the last number of years and the various programs within which those investments are made. Primarily registries and repositories for the most part, and a lot of success on the diagnostic imaging side with respect to results and actual outcomes. After going through all of this data, we spend a lot of time as an organization trying to understand what do all these things mean to the marketplace. What do they mean to us in relation to the marketplace, and what do we have to do as a company to continue to grow in that marketplace and to address the needs of what we see happening. So this stakeholder evaluation that we've done just kind of highlights some of the information we've just talked about. Costs are continuing to increase. We've got resource issues. We've got wait time issues. We've got, if you will, access to appropriate levels of care, significant issues, creating backlogs throughout the system. And even on the pharmaceutical side, the drug side of the business, shared service organizations are being implemented that are going to help drive down cost. They're seen as means of savings, anyways, on the supply management side of the industry. And so, the question then becomes, how do we deal with all of these significant problems in this business? How can we affect them? And, I'm here to say I think technology can affect them significantly. I think we're already doing a lot of things in the technology side that is addressing these issues, and driving down costs from the patient and medication safety perspective, and increasing the accuracy of what we do, or the efficiency, or the providing of care, or the safer provision of care with respect to our patients. Waiting times are being addressed by various types of management systems that affect wait times. We are implementing those across the country. Capacity management is another, or is a factor that relates not only to just capacity, but also the flow of patients. How do we manage the flow of patients to optimize their stay in the hospital and in the acute environment anyway? And how do we move them through the system in the most efficient and effective way? And then, of course, cost and control efficiencies, where we're leveraging regional models, like I said, the shared service organizations, which effectively are groups of hospitals, not necessarily within the same region, but many within the same region, coming together and leveraging the strengths of group buying, leveraging the strengths of back office infrastructure, commonalities, and driving savings to the bottom, to the financial side of the house. But the question would be, where are we going to get the dollars to try to implement the systems that these things can help us with? So we've got these problems to fix. We've got these great technology in the marketplace that we need to deal with it. Where's the money to implement those systems? And that, as a vendor in this business, is what we face on a fairly regular basis. Helping our customers allocate the appropriate resources, financial and people, and we'll talk about that later, to actually drive these kinds of efficient tools into their environments. And so, one of those ways is Infoway. We've dealt with a lot of Infoway funding and a lot of Infoway information over the last number of years. But what we don't see a lot of is grassroots funding. So while implementing repositories and registries and broad provincial programs can be helpful and is helpful, it's not everything that we need to do. And if you look at an individual hospital or health system where a smaller percentage of the care across the system is provided, but yet an important component of the care that's being provided exists, we see a lot of difficulty at that level. And that's what I refer to as grassroots. And I'll make some comparisons between what we do in Canada with respect to our grassroots and what our friends down south have done or are doing. Because there's a considerable difference between our country and theirs on a lot of different fronts, but that's one that I think is important that we should probably explore a little bit. So let's look at some priorities and observations, and then we'll talk a little bit about some questions at the end of this section. But I want to bring to you a few interesting priorities that we see happening in the marketplace, and that I think are important in terms of how we address the technology responses to these things. This one is, I've talked a little bit about capacity and throughput, and I'm just trying to give you a sense of what that really means. But in terms of capacity and throughput, the real simple way to understand it is the dark line on this diagram is the peak admission period. The dotted line is the peak discharge period. Okay? And so if they're not exactly the same line, or in fact if they're not reversed, then what we're doing is we're trying to find beds for people, and there's people in those beds that are supposed to be leaving, but we haven't lined up how they should be coming in and going out. If we took this discharge line and put it on this side, and we took the admission line and put it on this side, problem solved, right? Because we got them out of the bed, we got the bed cleaned, and now it's ready for the next patient to come in and get put in the bed. But in fact, we do the exact opposite. And this is the kind of simple thing, simple but very difficult to change and to incorporate process to manage in a typical hospital setting. But this is the studies we've found that we can implement systems to affect this kind of change, to help hospitals manage the reversing of these two points. And it's a critical factor in helping reduce or eliminate bottlenecks within the system. Because once you make that change, you affect everything downstream and upstream because of the logical flow of how things work. Again, we've talked about the aging population, but it's driving a priority in our healthcare system. A significant priority is disease management. And 16 million of us have a chronic disease. And we expect that to increase by increase of 41% by the year 2030. Not good. A lot of preventative things are going on to try to stop that from happening, and I'm sure many of us, and this is a fairly young crowd in this room, but I'm sure you're all acutely aware of those things. It seems to be a fairly significant item in the press. The last, or one of the other priorities that we've been dealing with is the shift in the care model. And of importance is just a couple of components. There's a lot of different elements of the care model that, or the model of care that are emerging or changing. But we're moving from institutions to communities. So while we talk about hospitals as being the place where most acute care happens, the reality is, in this day and age, the hospital is becoming just the place where those critical, significant, difficult, complex things occur. The community is where most of the care is going to be happening. And so we have to understand this care model has to shift, and it has to go outside the walls of the hospital. And that's a very difficult transition for a clinical provider to be able to do, because those two things don't talk to each other. And as we build regional health systems, as we build LHINs in Ontario, those things will come together. But it's a significant shift in how care is provided. And then, of course, the other one, and this is more clinical in nature, but moving from single provider decisions, your doctor makes your decisions for you, et cetera, to a care team, a multidisciplinary view. It's been going on for a long time in the business, but we need to have systems. We need to provide those care providers with the multidisciplinary view of the care they're providing to their patients. One of the other things that really is a significant change in what's happening in the industry is this thing that we call predictive care. And predictive care is effectively moving from treating someone who's going to get or who is sick to dealing with preventing someone from getting sick. So from reactive to proactive. And it also is dealing with the fact that physicians are, not just physicians, all clinicians are dealing with, as this thing says, a tsunami of data. I mean, you think about it. All the information technology that's been implemented over the last 15 or 20 years is collecting data. It's collecting more and more and more and more data all the time. There are new technologies being developed to capture more data from more devices that are being used within the context of providing treatment to a patient. And all of that data is now getting thrown at the clinicians. So it's not just as simple as looking at vitals and making a decision anymore. It's all about the vitals and the lab results and the radiology exams and the monitoring devices that are feeding data into the systems. It's providing a tremendous amount of data, which is making decision-making, frankly, uncomfortable in many cases. So the new care model relies heavily on the fact that technology exists, and that technology is providing this tremendous amount of data. So what do we do with it? Well, we've got this predictive care model, and I'll just walk you through a couple of the pieces of it. But it starts with a knowledge-based care, intelligently driving care forward through discharge. So starting the patient off in whatever care setting they're being brought into based on whatever condition they have, and moving them along the continuum, moving them, not letting them go, moving them along the continuum to get them out the door, to get them cared for and their procedures completed. Patient flow management. We've talked about that whole concept of capacity management, flow management. We take that and we move that just a little bit more forward, and we can now create predictive models of what kind of care providers do I need, based on the kind of patients I have, based on how I'm going to flow them through my system, what kind of staffing resources do I need to have to deal with this patient population or this unit or whatever the unit is you're referring to. Monitored care. I talked a little bit about that health buddy or that little device that was at home. That is happening today in intensive care units with virtual care capabilities where the patient is monitored, but somebody 1,000 miles away can actually take action on the results of that monitoring of that patient, all because of the technology that's connecting them together. And then, of course, the home setting where there's a little of this happening today, that we expect to see grow tremendously with lots of reminders, lots of capabilities for people who are unable to provide care to themselves or remember to take their pills. The kinds of things that give them the reminders that help them with their daily activities so that they can provide themselves their care without actually being in a setting where they're being cared for by other people, until that time actually arrives, of course. The other one, another significant one, is personalized medicine. It's a project that we've worked on here with Grand River Hospital and with the Institute some years ago, did a little investigating in. But personalized care is the one thing that really takes this genomic data and all of the tsunami of data that exists and synthesizes it for the clinicians, so that the clinician can be given information that he or she can make decisions on, and they can be comfortable that it's a clinical decision support database that's feeding them this information, that's giving them the clues and the ideas of what should be done to this patient based on a tremendous amount of information and a lot of research that sits in behind it because of the fact that we've got the ability to look at the genomic structure these days. And then the last point is this whole lifetime care, and I actually brought in put an example of what that really means. And of course, clearly, the very beginning of it represents an ethics issue for us. So I'm not going to get into that because we could talk about that for days. But the genomic assessment at birth, that's the ethics issue, of course. Whether one would want that to be done or not, we'll leave that to another day to discuss, but let's assume it is done. We identify certain conditions that this individual may encounter throughout their life, and so the care plan that we develop, the lifetime care plan that we put together for them through their clinicians, follows them along a path that tries to avoid getting those diseases. An interesting concept, but all of these things can be done. They're certainly not in practice today, but they're all very capable of happening in this day and age. And I suspect we'll see that, and we'll be dealing with the ethics issue in the not too distant future, and I'm sure it's being dealt with today in many places. So those are the priorities, at least the ones that we see. Now let's talk about some observations. So again, as I said, we do a lot of research across the country. We do a lot of research in the business. We do a lot of research across the world trying to understand the impact of changes in the system and what's happening upon our business. And so, the 17% Canadians having an EHR, that's what we've achieved so far after X number of years of InfoWay funding and provincial programs and various other things. Not a heck of a lot. And I would venture to say that although the Auditor General's report on the InfoWay progress recently did identify that there is 17% and InfoWay is doing a pretty good job, I think there's a lot more that we can be doing. and a lot more that we should be doing. And as I said, the first wave of projects from InfoWave is focused on repositories and registries. Right now, what we're dealing with is adoption. Adoption of systems, the use of systems by every kind of provider is what's critical to the business, critical to the industry, and critical to patient care. And we're dealing with significant adoption issues outside of the acute care setting. So I don't know if there's any physicians in the room, but it's the physician adoption aspect of this that is significant, and we can talk a little bit about that in a little bit, because there's a good position on both sides of the fence with respect to why adoption isn't happening the way we might have expected it to. Of course, we've got issues within Ontario with the e-health. I'll use the word scandal. What the heck? With the e-health issues, in Quebec, we have similar kinds of issues arising, and in British Columbia, if you've been following the press, you've seen some e-health issues in British Columbia. So the industry is taking a little bit of a shot in the back, shot in the chin, kick in the knees, whatever you want to call it, and we've got to recover from it, and we've got to find ways, and we'll talk a little bit more about how I think we can do a better job of that. The other one I would point out is, as I've said, home care and chronic disease management are going to drive us significantly. And the last point, this H1N1 pandemic, we were the distributor in Ontario for the H1N1 vaccine. And part of the involvement we had was addressing, how do we get to those populations? And it was clear that those that had an EHR or that had information that we could access or that could be accessed in order to provide the delivery where it was necessary, were actually better equipped to get to deal with the vaccination and the whole pandemic issue. So those were the observations, a few questions, and then we'll go into a couple of interesting ideas. What is the strategy and vision today? The fact of the matter is we've been involved in a strategy and a vision that was developed about 10 years ago. I would argue that it has evolved, it has grown, it has moved along the path to completion, but it needs to also be changing with the times. It needs to also address the fact that there are new technologies out there, and some of the things that have been done are frankly not needed anymore. I mean, they were needed 10 years ago, but maybe they're not needed today. We need to face the facts as to where all of this vision and strategy exists and how does it get updated and how do we keep it alive. And of course, today the patient is far more involved than ever before in the provision of care and their involvement in their care on the healthcare system. Where do we have leadership, accountability, and oversight? I mean, the fact of the matter is, like I said earlier, we have to be able to deal with failure. And if we can't deal with failure, then we're never going to get anywhere. So let's figure out how to deal with failure. Let's find the right leadership that's going to take us to where we have to go from an e-health perspective, and let's support that leadership to get us there. We've got a lot of good people in this country. We've lost a lot of good people as a result of the recent problems. And that's unfortunate, but there's a lot of good people that need to be able to step up and have the support to help move us forward and develop the strategy, develop the vision, and manage and be accountable for what it is that we're trying to accomplish. There's a lot of fiscal constraints going on right now. I hear from my customers on a regular basis the challenges that they're facing financially. And I think there's, the point here about, if government is to exercise control, shouldn't they also provide grassroots stimulus to the healthcare system? I mean, this system is run by the government. We don't always want the government to do everything for us. My goodness, we definitely don't want that. But they administer this healthcare system that we're in. They are the ones that are imposing the fiscal constraints. Maybe there's a way that we can work with government to impose stimulus at the grassroots level. Not necessarily always at the high level or at the provincial or regional level, but at the grassroots level where our hospitals, our physicians, our community care providers can leverage technology to move themselves forward. That's really what that means. And you probably do know, less than 20% of our physicians in this country have an electronic medical record. That's critical. That's 80% of the care that's delivered in the country, and very few of them have an electronic record that we can connect to. And the reason that that's important comes up in the next couple of ideas. And I'm not a radical person, but certainly not a radical person. My staff would tell me that I'm not anyway. I'm pretty laid back. But I think we need to think creatively. I think we need to get outside the box. I had an interesting meeting recently, and I thought I would throw a few pictures in here about this meeting. But, this guy, I actually had lunch with this guy. And I'll tell you about that later. But, we didn't get here, he didn't get there rather, on a single strategy or a single vision. He got there after hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of mistakes were made and trials were attempted, and finally they figured out how to do, and each step along the way of this whole vision of getting to space was a progressive drive by individuals who had the knowledge and the wherewithal and the government support and the industry support and the public support to get there. And it's a very complex achievement. But, I think healthcare is a pretty complex world as well. But I can't imagine that if they can do that, we can't figure out how to get electronic health records figured out in our industry. So let's talk about a couple of ideas. And they're kind of, maybe this one actually is the most off the wall. Sorry. See, there I go. I was about to start walking across the room, but I forgot about the camera. Read the question. Does anybody know the answer to this question? What country has had the most growth in mobile phone subscriptions? No, but that's close. I think you've got the right idea. Just a different country. Africa. 550% surge in subscriptions since 2003 to 2008. Now, why? When you think about it, why Africa? Does anybody know why? Anybody have an idea why? Exactly. There's no infrastructure. So they weren't burdened by the fact that there's a bunch of telephone lines, we better use them. They said there are no telephone lines. There was I remember the stats from one of the articles I read, there was one phone per 10 people, and they were spread miles and miles and miles apart. So, no, there was no infrastructure. So what did they have to do? And in order to drive themselves forward, they said, hey, we got the technology, let's just deploy the technology. And the technology wasn't hard wires and infrastructure, it was satellites and receivers and the necessary technology for the most latest devices. So it required appropriate incentives and behavior on their part. It required adoption, which clearly made sense because I think the adoption aspect of it, if you look at what they do with their mobile phones, we look like the old country. They're making purchases, they're making buying decisions. They've got an interactive capability that we only talk about here. They're actually doing it. Businessmen who live there was an article about a guy who lived in a mud hut but had his cell phone, and he made his purchases for his little business over his cell phone, and then he walked 20 miles to go sell them to his constituents. It's a bizarre story, but it's reality. It's the truth. And it was because of behavior and adoption and the fact that they built an interoperable environment in order for this to work. They didn't try to connect it to the old infrastructure, because frankly it just didn't exist. We need to think of it the same. We need to think of health information in the same way. And what we're faced with today is a ton of technology that's deployed on some infrastructure, and we're trying to continue to build that infrastructure so that eventually it'll be this big electronic record, when in fact we can connect it all today. So if we throw away trying to figure out the infrastructure and focus on the connectivity aspect, you'll hear a lot about this HIE thing called Health Information Exchange. And that's frankly what it is. It's connecting all of the pieces together without building monolithic databases. But some of those monolithic databases are actually of value, and they're part of the connectivity that has to be included. But it's a different kind of thinking. It's a different kind of focus. And if you look, If you look, we have our typical environment today. We add our community environment to the same puzzle. We add our regional environment, where we're dealing with health plans and community labs and sort of the regional perspective. And then we have a national perspective as well. And one of those national perspectives is Infoway. There's no question. They've built repositories, they've built registries that could be leveraged to do this. But we also need to focus on consumers. How do we connect the consumer and their personal health record to all of this stuff? That's becoming a significant element of what we have to do. How am I doing for time? Okay. So, HIE is accelerating faster than the EHR. This is a U.S. statistic only. I just wanted to share this with you to give you the sense that if you look at the diagrams, the gray line is health information exchange funding. And that funding is primarily coming from states. And it's going directly to hospitals or health systems who are integrating themselves to their environment, as we described on the previous slide. Following that, the light blue line is, and you can see where the peaks are different, is the EHR funding that's also coming from various sources in the U.S. This is the grassroots stimulus that I was talking about earlier. They seem to have a better sense of stimulating at the grassroots, and it's coming from the $21 billion that the government is throwing into healthcare in the U.S. anyway, so there's a tremendous amount of stimulus going on, but we're seeing it at the grassroots level. And that's what's different. Moving on to another idea, procurement. I mean, this country is about to start spending tremendous amounts of money on systems procurements. We already do, but now it's only going to get worse. So we've got three different kinds of procurements, in my opinion. We've got the good, the bad, and the ugly, so we'll talk about the ugly first. So the ugly is when a systems decision goes through an exhaustive and costly process only to end in an unqualified selection. And unqualified, define it any way you want, but people get eliminated, or good systems get eliminated earlier on because of a technicality. There's a lack of funding. The RFP just stops, because that's happened to us a number of times. Objectives aren't clearly defined, or there's political influence or influence from a consultant who has a particular bearing towards a particular vendor. I mean, these things do happen. I'm not saying I'm not just making this stuff up. These things happen. And this is what our industry needs to spend some time understanding, because this is what drives costs, and this is what drives poor decisions for the systems that we have to try to tie together. There's bad ones, and these are the ones that are going to start happening to all of us, when a system decision is predefined, but a procurement has to be conducted. So you have a vendor which you've spent many, many years with, you've got a strategy with, you have an end goal of your strategy, you have a very clear direction of where you're taking, and you've completed 3/4 of your strategy, you've got to do another 25%, and you've got what you had planned for 3 years ago. Well, today, in the new world, so to speak, we're going to see that 25% sent out to tender. Now, tendering the 25% might mean you have to replace the 75% you already have. So it's kind of like, well, why would I tender it? Because it only makes sense that I stick with my vendor and go forward. Well, with the things that have happened in the market lately, particularly in Ontario, we're going to see a lot of those kinds of things, and it's our health systems and our hospitals taking care to do the right thing and make sure their processes are clean and squeaky clean, so they don't get called up on the rug for doing something wrong. It's kind of the pendulum has swung as far to the right as it'll go. And then, of course, there's the good ones. And the good ones are when systems decisions are made and the objectives of everybody are online and clearly defined, and there's a fair and open process to evaluate the systems to fulfill the appropriate need. And it requires, the objectives have to be lined up, but it also requires that there's a relationship established with that vendor. It requires a relationship to be established so that you as the health system or whoever you are buying understand the partnership that you're getting into. We're talking about millions and millions and millions of dollars of public money. It has to be a pretty solid relationship, and it has to fit in the grand scheme of where you're going. And then the last radical idea is investing in human capital. And we don't do it very well. And we don't do it very well because we are cost constrained. So we try to do things not on the nickel, but we do a lot of cutting. We do a lot of shaving off of what could really be utilized to get us to the right place. And when we don't do it right, when we do it really bad, we have complete failures. We have a problem with change management. I mean, our industry talks about change management all the time. Consultants tell you everything they can tell you about change management because they know everything there is to know about change management. They come in, they do change management, then they leave. They don't come back unless you make them come back. The industry, has to hold our feet to the fire. So as a vendor in this industry, results-based implementations is something that we think needs to be done. We think Infoway needs to focus on results-based implementations. We think the government, I deal with the government, I talk to them about what's going on in the industry, and I tell them, this is what you should be making people do. Pardon me. Results-based implementations focus on outcomes, not just getting it done on time and on budget, but what did you achieve? And it's not necessarily, this reduction of patient days or this reduction in cost. I mean, there's a lot of factors that can be affected and can really drive the fact that you've made a good decision, that you've done a good implementation, if you focus it on the results. And they don't always have to happen 6 months later. Lots of results come out, shortly after an implementation has gone live. But the fact of the matter is the industry needs to focus on that. It also needs to focus on clinical transformation. And clinical transformation, and I like this little quote from our friend Woodrow Wilson, if you want to make enemies, try changing something. We used to have IT departments take care of all the change. Now it's the clinicians. And I'm telling you, clinicians are tough to make change happen. But those that embrace it, the others follow them. And that's the key. You get the guys, the clinicians that are with the technology, that are wanting to move it forward, and the others come along with them. All right, I'm sorry. And then, of course, the last point with respect to change management and is the fact that it's the hardest part. It dwarfs everything else. I mean, there's some statistics with respect to it. Leadership is obviously critical, but I will tell you, organization and culture are very significant. You could have good leadership and bad culture, and it won't work. One would say, well, if you have bad culture, you probably have bad leadership too. And yeah, maybe there's a timing issue, but the fact of the matter is those two together are killers. Let's talk about something that's good. We've had successes all across the country. I'm going to pick out one, happens to be one of ours because I know it better than I know my competitors, of course. But this is a project, Infoway funded it, Physician Office System money funded it. We had grassroots funding from the Hospital of the Health Region, the government, the provincial government, and it deals with integration. So it goes back to that diagram I talked about, health integration, information exchange, where we tied a lot of different pieces of a healthcare system together. So this happened in Nova Scotia. It's happening, rather, in Nova Scotia. We're putting the hospitals all together in a single repository type of environment where they can view data from across the health system in the province through a single portal. We're connecting physicians to that same portal and physician office systems so that in a single view, they'll be in a single sign-on, their clinicians will be able to see their patients in their current setting and in other settings that they've been across the province. Simple. We don't need to build any big giant repositories or registries. Well, we have registries, and we are tying ourselves into those other sources of data. But what's critical is that we're joining the pieces, above the infrastructure to ensure that we collect the EHR and provide them with an interoperable EHR, which is effectively what that project is. Okay, so we have this challenge, and I call the challenge convergence. In fact, we had a little chat at lunch, not talking about healthcare, but convergence was another issue that came up. But, convergence is happening in this industry. We need to figure out how to drive it harder. But we need to provide ubiquitous application of health information. I mean, that's what's happening. There's tons of data. Everybody wants access to it. And it's driving the EHR. And the fact of the key point on this slide is this consumer demand issue. I mentioned earlier that I wanted to talk about the consumer, and I'll take just a moment now to do that. But and I talked to the government about this as well. You know, in every other thing that happens in this industry, and let's take music and iPods as an example. You know, it's driven. iPod was created, the functionality that it has, the ubiquitous use of iPod technology these days is a wonderful thing for the consumer, and it's frankly been driven by consumer demand. Apple didn't just come up with it and say, okay, here, come and follow. People wanted, there was a progressive thing that occurred, and they ended up creating the iPod, and it became what it is today. Well, in healthcare, nobody is asking for the data. Nobody is asking, the consumer is not raising a fuss about having access to their data. And why not? Because the consumer, most of the consumers, don't feel they have access to it. And because that's the mentality we've built into the healthcare system. That's the mentality clinicians force upon the patients. It's their data. Pardon me. They should have it. And we need to create public demand around it in order for this whole concept of convergence to actually succeed. So as a very large company in this industry, how do we make sure we can deal with this convergence? Because I believe firmly that it will happen. I don't know when. I'm hoping it'll happen in the next 5 years. But we'll have to see. We need a lot of different players to play a lot of different roles to make convergence occur. And I think one of the biggest things that's supporting it is the fact that technology is becoming more and more ubiquitous. We're getting PHRs. Google is in on it. Microsoft is in on it. Companies like us integrate with those two to provide the PHR. We integrate those systems with our systems, with our doctors, with our hospitals. So these things are all being forced upon us as a vendor in the industry. So I see that convergence happening. I don't see the public demand pushing it. And we need to educate the public. The government needs to educate the public to increase that demand and to create that convergence model that is so similar to everything else in our industry, or everything else in our society, rather. So, what do we do? And as I was just saying, what do we do to exploit this convergence? Well, we have lots of products. We have lots of money. We have an exclusive focus on healthcare. Pardon me. Obviously, financially stable, and we have a pretty significant focus on our customers. And our mission is advancing the health of the healthcare system by advancing the success of our partners. A little commercial from McKesson to end this. But I want to talk about this guy just for a minute, and then I'll finish up. Is that okay? This is another picture of Dr. David Williams. I had lunch with him a couple weeks ago. And actually, I called him to have lunch with him about this. And I said, this is what I have to go and do. What do you think? What's going on? What's your perspective of what's happening in our industry? And he had some interesting comments to make. But, and his big comment was the fact that, we've seen all these failures. And this guy, he's a doctor. He's actually a medical doctor and also an astronaut. And he's also a techie. So, put doctor and techie together and you get a scary thing. Put astronaut in there, it gets even scarier. But very interesting guy. He put the network together on whatever shuttle mission, I forget what number it was that he was on, where he was the guy who handled all the different PCs that are on the shuttle. And it's a completely separate network than the computers that run the shuttle itself. Of course, they can't have anything talk to each other, and there's all these securities and firewalls and various things. But the network he put together included DOS, or a DOS machine, a Windows 97 machine, a Windows 2000 machine, an XP, and he had a Linux. He had all kinds of different operating systems. But in his simple view of the world, These are all capable things that were all doing a certain job on this space shuttle, and his job was to make sure they all hung together and connected. And his point was, it doesn't matter what systems you have out there. If the system serves the purpose of its user, then it's worthwhile connecting. Perspective of a physician, I have to admit, because sometimes they're focused on a fairly narrow segment of what it is that needs to be done. His comment, also was there's not very many systems that actually service exactly what that physician wants to do. If you can make a product do exactly what the doctor wants done anytime he or she wants it done, then you've got yourself a winner. And of course, that's true. That doesn't exist, but that's the kind of way they look at the world. They build their own little tools and they build their own little Excel databases, and that's how this guy put this thing together on the shuttle. So his comments were interesting. That's kind of his background, but basically he focused on the fact that lots of mistakes get made, but a good vision will get you there. And I think that's what I'll leave you with is we have to be able to make mistakes. We have to manage the vision. We have to update the strategy. We have to evolve, and we have to stay focused. And I hope all of us can go back to our respective organizations and be that champion and focus on where we're going, where we're taking this business, where we're going in this industry, and make it successful because it has every right to be and it has the foundation to do so. So thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you, Ron, for a very interesting presentation, and I would like to invite the audience now, either in person here at the University of Waterloo or via the web or the video broadcast sites, to send in their questions, and so I open the floor for questions from the audience. Anybody there yet that has a question? Well, perhaps I can start things off. What might be a way to trigger this grassroots funding that you see so instrumental and actually being quite successful in the United States?
Well, I think there are triggers that are being attempted now, and most of those are coming from our hospitals. Our hospitals are dealing with the fiscal constraints in which they're operating. Part of the problem is they're not just focused on IT. And so I think one of the opportunities we have is to maybe look at where the funding is going, either from the federal, provincial levels, and direct some of it towards more grassroots-related initiatives. And how we do that is, frankly, lobbying the government and lobbying our healthcare constituents.
So it might be, for example, from the provincial level or from, I guess the LHINs don't exactly have their own funding. They receive funding from other bodies, but that might be, yeah.
I mean, I think as you move it down, if the LHINs get the IT funding, that's moving it to the grassroots level because they're going to distribute it to the constituents within their LHIN, which are the hospitals and the community health and all the other providers. And that's where we need to see more focus at that level.
I agree. I'd like to see some more funding at that level too. And you had many interesting comments throughout your presentation, but one that struck me was how do we accept failure without sort of destroying the people involved in the process, in the failure in the process, or the projects. And for example, in the information technology industry, I think what has been shown is that only 1 out of 10 initiatives is actually successful. Mm-hmm. And somehow we accept that there, and we don't break people's back in the process if they're unsuccessful. So how can we get that it's okay to fail in the initiatives that we take in healthcare?
Yeah, and that excellent point. In fact, I had this debate at the office because one of the slides had a point on it which I didn't point out to everyone, but there was a comment there that indicated, governments need quick wins, or the system needs quick wins, and that's not going to happen with gigantic projects. And so there was a point in time where we all wanted large projects because those would be successful and they would drive behavior, and they were so big they would drive this adoption and this behavior. But in fact, maybe we should be looking at some smaller, more manageable ideas to drive wins into the system. And some of those, because they're not huge, if there's a failure, it's not going to turn everybody upside down. But I still think we have a mentality against failure, and regardless of the project, that mentality needs to be changed.
My little experience in this whole area is that we were involved in a couple of innovation projects, and it seemed that innovation was excluded in the drive to get the project done on time and on budget. And I must admit, sometimes it's very hard to be innovative within those constraints. Right. But I understand we have to be accountable, but that's the battle, is to somehow achieve all those things. I believe we have a question from the web, so I'll turn it over to Martha.
This comes from Dominic. You mentioned the challenge in dealing with the data tsunami. What has McKesson and other vendors done to help in data information integration and visualization?
Well, a number of different things contribute to that. We have information systems that help to collect the data and present to physicians or clinicians, nurses, physicians, etc., visual presentations of the data. So our portal, as an example, I talked about the New Brunswick thing, that's an example of taking data from a variety of sources, integrating it in a single view, and allowing it to be visualized. We have other solutions that visualize the floors of a hospital and what's happening in the individual rooms and what's happening at an individual patient level with respect to lab results or drugs that have to be administered or risks to falling or a variety of different conditions that can all be viewed from a visual perspective. Collecting the data and then presenting it that way are features of many systems in this day and age due to the technology that we have available. And so that's how we kind of drive that visualization aspect of the integrated data. Does that answer your question, Dominic?
He'll get back to me. I do have another Dominic question. What do you think about the need for disruptive solutions, i.e., simpler but far less expensive solutions that work for smaller health organizations? What is McKesson doing re this?
Yeah, I was reading something recently about actually similar disruptive innovation was what I was reading about. And I think our focus is on leveraging the complex environments and the simpler environments, if you will, through a variety of different tools and a variety of different solutions that we can offer to the marketplace. Remote hosting, predefined tables, pre-built systems that meet essentially 90% of the needs with some small amount of customization from a table perspective. These are the kinds of things where we can focus and move more complex systems into less capable environments or less complex environments, and yet still gain utility from the use of those systems.
A question about managing, I guess, or dealing with consumer expectations, like whether you feel that that's an important consideration in the sort of culture shift that you've talked about.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I do, and I part of the problem that I personally feel we're dealing with today is the fact that the consumer expectation isn't incorporated. And so if we can if we can educate the consumer, and we have to do that, in a national or provincial way, if you will, and I do believe governments have to drive that because, I don't know who else is going to want to drive that. But once we start that education, they will then become a more aware consumer, and then we're going to be driving towards defining those expectations and driving this convergence to those expectations. But I think, I don't think it's being addressed today it is in very, very minute ways. There are some solutions that are patient-specific, that are, like patient electronic health records, if you will. We've done some of that kind of work where we've incorporated patients into the design of the solution. But it's a small piece of a very big puzzle, which is very clearly not currently being incorporated into the big picture.
Hi, from Dominic. You answered my question. Dominic has another question. How do you see the industry dealing with the needs of the long-term care facilities that often have minimal funding to acquire technology?
Well, it's happening now, and that's as a result of regional integration. But those long-term care facilities will have to leverage off of their acute care partners. And most of the systems in those environments are adaptable for the most part. Some aren't, but for a large number of the vendors out there today, they are adaptable and they will provide the required functionality to manage long-term care facilities. There are some specific components of systems that long-term care requires, but I see it. Right now, there's not, unless there's a significant change in the funding model and the funding distributions, which is likely not to happen because they're forcing the regions to do that funding distribution. So we're going to have to lobby at the LHIN level or the regional level to move that money, take some of it from the acute environment and put it in long-term care. How about moving such and such, a program that's in the hospital? Let's move it out to the long-term care facility where we can provide some additional funding, some additional, if you will, functionality and purpose for that long-term care facility. And by doing that, by moving those programs out of the acute environment and into a place where they logically can exist, funding will obviously follow, but I think there will be also a requirement for additional technical or technology, and that funding has to come from the mothership, if you will.
I have a question, I guess, and one of the things that you mentioned was that where things have been successful is where there's been the combination of leadership and the right culture in that facility or institution or whatever the organization might be. So how do we create that right environment, and how do we up the leadership capacity and capability that we have in Canada?
Actually, I think we have a lot of leadership capability and capacity here. I think we have a lot of the right cultures in our healthcare institutions and regional environments. I think we need to be, we at least I can say what McKesson does, we help our customers educate themselves in that regard. So we have thousands of customers across North America, and we enable them to interchange with one another so that they can learn lessons from each other. So we might have the greatest leadership and the greatest culture at a hospital here in Canada, but that leadership and that culture hasn't implemented physician order entry, for example, or hasn't even thought about how to do that. Well, that takes more leadership and more cultural change. Well, we'll introduce them to that where that has happened, somewhere in the U.S. or somewhere in some other part of either the North America or the world, and help that cultural change and that leadership knowledge transfer. I think that's the only way. That's one of the easier ways, frankly, that we can do it. I think the other way is to drive that leadership and cultural knowledge into things like our Canadian College for Health Service Executives. Driving it to leadership forums where they seek to learn, more about having those skills.
And I guess I would add is to encourage our students to get much more involved in the healthcare industry, right from the programs that they take at their university level or college level. Maybe we need some sort of tracking mechanism we discussed this at lunch, to enable our students to get more clearly involved in the healthcare industry upon graduation, so that they can find their way into that industry and become part of that culture and part of that leadership.
You know, I think that's a great point. I think as we were saying at lunch, part of it is bringing students in from their educational experiences into an environment like McKesson, for example, where they can get some grassroots, grounded experience in various environments in the healthcare field and learn about the different aspects of it, and then, frankly, going back into the healthcare system at some point. It happens a lot. I mean, we have a lot of people who went into the healthcare system, physicians, nurses, various other kinds of clinicians, and IT people who have come into the private side, McKesson, and then gone back out afterwards, or who continue to practice and do both. So I think it starts at the student level, and programs that will give them the experiences they need are actually key. Critical.
For example, we had Gary Hicks at lunch with us, who is a graduate from the University of Waterloo, twice-time graduate from the University of Waterloo, and is now the joint CIO for Grand River Hospital and St. Mary's Hospital. He started working with industry, as I understand, and then gradually made the leap into the healthcare system from the IT side, and is now the CIO. I guess also here is Rob Dale from McKesson. And Rob, how did you get involved in this industry?
My background is actually finance, and I moved, there's a lot of financial back office systems that hospitals use, so as I went through and realized I probably didn't want to be an accountant for the rest of my life, I moved over to a healthcare IT company and helped them implement financial systems, and it was a quick segue over to clinical systems, and a career of 15 years here as well. So there's lots of need for good resources, students in this field getting into healthcare IT, no question.
I think we have a question from the audience.
Yeah, I just wanted to know that if I want to have an idea about the comparison of finance industry and health industry, like in terms of access of information, we know that a lot of information in the finance industry is readily available. You can access it in electronic form, right? Now, if you want to compare the two industries, how would you benchmark? Like if I give 10 in the finance industry, in the healthcare industry, what would you rate? And what might be the driving the difference between the two industries?
I'm going to give it a 5. And I'm going to give it a 5 because to access the same kind of basic information, you can get hospital data online from every hospital. Usually their annual reports provide you all kinds of information about them. What you can't find easily, and you can find some of this now, and it's growing, wait times, performance of physicians, performance of hospitals and various procedures, etc. Those kinds of statistics, they're growing, but they're nowhere near where we as a country should probably have them. We don't see a demand for that either. I mean, we're not a competitive healthcare environment. We probably should be, and we likely will be as we educate our consumers more and more. But if you look at the U.S., you'd find a much more competitive environment where some of this kind of data is available and is made available either as a state or by the states or by the individual facilities in comparison to their partners. So we have a lot of similar data that we provide. I wouldn't say we provide it as much as the finance industry does. And I can see it growing from a 5 to a 7 in the next couple of years. The government has stepped in and done a lot. We have the Canadian Institute for Health Information that provides a lot of data. But again, it's population-based data. But if you want to get it down to specific hospital kinds of information, that's a little bit hard to find right now, and there's more that should be available. Is that the idea? Is that where you were going with your question?
Yeah, that's the broad level. You were looking at the question at the macro level, but I was more thinking, say, I have 2 cards in my pocket, one bank card and The other one is the health card. Now, if I take this bank card to a bank, the bank, the agent there can access all kind of information about me, about my financial records. Yep. But if I take my health card to a doctor's in a physician's office, this card is probably used for just administrative purposes, not to access any informations. Now, in terms of technology is there to make the information available, right? But it's not implemented. So I was looking more at the consumer level information.
Okay, so at that micro level, I give it a 10 and a 1. The reality, it's true. Like I said, trying to connect all the pieces is the challenge we face in the industry. Having it portable, putting all that stuff about you on your card is it's technically feasible, but not in this environment. Not in the way we have built our systems. Not in a manner that would ensure that everything on that card is everything there is to know about you. It would frankly be unsafe. But there are certain parts of certain kinds of information that people are looking at and saying, we need that card to have these 10 things, and with those 10 things, 90% of the care that you might have to have taken provided to you in some faraway place where they can't access your record would be of value. The question, though, is how much value is that? Do you really need to carry around your health card, your health data on a card? I don't know. I'm just posing the question. I think that's a perfectly valid question that the industry needs to figure out. Because I travel a lot. I don't get sick most of the time when I'm traveling, but if I do, I get home, or I try to get home. Having my record available, in some other far-off land, is probably not all that valuable. The amount of times it's going to happen are probably minimal. What I would like is that my record is available where I go and get my health care, and that everybody in that environment can access it. And if that can be done, then put it on a card and I'll carry it around.
I think there are more questions from the web.
Dominic's not allowed to ask any more questions.
Okay. I have actually several questions from people. To improve quality and reduce costs, how do you plan to deliver the current-based evidence to care providers to enable evidence-based decision-making? Have you considered working with peer-reviewed, structured abstract services like BMJ Evidence Updates?
I'll speak to the very last part. No, I'm not familiar with who that is. Our learned research folks may be more aware of that than I am. But how we deliver evidence-based care is through proven technologies, data sources that provide that, the data sources that have been vetted, and have the protocols and then that information is made available to providers, and then they, in their settings of care, in their environment, they then make it available for use. So, they choose what evidence that they want to deploy in the provision of care in their facilities. So we don't dictate what the evidence is. We provide them with various sources of data with the evidence in them. And then they select which ones they want or how to deploy it.
I suggest that we take one more question, and the others we'll give to Ron Dunn by email so that perhaps you can answer them that way, so the audience will feel that they have an opportunity to get an answer. But Martha, one more question.
From someone we haven't heard yet from. What is McKesson doing in the U.S. to exploit the evolution of private sector personal health records? You mentioned pursuing integration with Google and Microsoft. Can you elaborate, please?
Sure. In the U.S., and I'll speak specifically since that was the question, in the U.S. we have a suite of products known as Relay Health. It's an organization within McKesson, and we acquired some number of years ago. And that, frankly, speaks to the HCIT concept I discussed earlier. It is a tool that integrates a health community environment a regional health environment, if you will, connecting patients, providers, and settings of care. So in that environment, what Relay provides is the ability to do e-prescribing for the physician, as well as releasing of information to the patients, populating a patient electronic health record, which the patient can access and interact with their clinicians via web visits, emails back and forth, a variety of other tools that enable that PHR. So it's that PHR that we connect with Google and Microsoft. So if you've populated Microsoft Health Vault with a bunch of your information, that same information can go through a translator, if you will, and populate the PHR. So you can have in your healthcare environment your PHR within Relay, if you will, and all of the other constituents that are connected to Relay can have populated with all of your data. And if you have some other sources outside of it that you use Google or Microsoft for, they can also populate it as well. So that's the tool that's used in the U.S. Obviously, we're looking at bringing that into Canada for obvious reasons, and frankly, reasons that apply differently to this market, but even more important to the regional connectivity that we're looking at.
All right. Well, I think we've come to the end of our time, and I want to thank the audience for their participation in the question and answer period, those coming in from the web and the video conference site as well. I'm sorry we've run out of time to answer those questions in a live setting, but we certainly will endeavor to answer them offline through Ron. And so, Ron, thank you once again for coming. We have a small token of our appreciation here. So I hope you enjoy that. And please let us give our thanks to Ron and his wonderful presentation today. So I hope you've enjoyed this seminar today, and will come back and see us in the new year, 2010. I can't believe it. So we look forward to seeing you again when we resume our seminars on January the 24th. I'll be the first, I think, maybe to say to you all, have a wonderful holiday season, and thank you all for coming. So thanks a lot. That was wonderful.